Great. Thank you, Jean. Thanks for that wonderful introduction and getting everybody up and running. So, folks, this is Annie Kilberg's voice. I am a facilitator with Triangle Associates, and we are hired to provide neutral third-party facilitation for EPA's public involvement meetings. I'll be facilitating tonight's meeting virtually, and I first want to just acknowledge everyone's time away in the evening from your friends, family, personal interests, hobbies, what have you. We really appreciate you taking your time away from all those things to be here tonight, to hear updates on so many important topics, and to hear presentations from lots of agency folks that have taken a lot of time to prepare really important information for you. So I'm going to go through a few things during this welcome piece, which includes the agenda, but before I do that, I want to just go through a few key format and protocol pieces for tonight's meeting. Then we're going to have a overview from the Oregon Governor's Office in regards to the COVID-19 response. We will have a CAG, the Community Advisory Group, introduction from Michael Pouncil. I'll introduce the EPA, DEQ, City of Portland, Metro, and Portland and Port of Portland folks that are on the line tonight and available for presentations and to answer questions. I'll go ahead and review the agenda, and then I'll ask Sean Sheldrake with EPA to introduce the new Portland Harbor team lead, Caleb Schaefer. And then we'll also be providing signed in-water agreement updates that will be done by Sean Sheldrake in this introduction section before we get into the remainder of the agenda. So as you know, we are hosting virtually today, and this is just to ensure the health and safety of the community members. To do this remotely is not the most ideal situation, but we are trying to take this and we're trying to use this as a trial run in case we do have to do this in the future. I do want to note that EPA has had to put a lot of resources towards tonight's meeting, and it's not a guarantee that that will be the case in the future. We really preferred and would like to continue the in-person meetings, and to do them in person and remotely is quite a lift. So we just want to caveat that we're glad to do it this time, and hopefully in the future we may be able to offer this if needed, but we just don't know if that is a possibility. So I know we have several presentations tonight and sections for information sharing. I wanted to let you know that we will be offering question and comment and question and answer and responses tonight, but we will be doing that via the question and answer comment box on the webinar, as Jean just pointed out. So what we'll do is we will wait until the presentations are complete, and then we will go to the comment and question box. We will be working to highlight the questions that you are asking and identify a person that can respond to those. So we're going to be working behind the scenes to do that. And then once a question is flagged for one of the agency folks on the phone, I'll go ahead and state who it's for, what the question is or the comment, and then the person that will be responding to it will go ahead and introduce themselves by name and the agency that they're with before they go into their response. So that's a reminder to the presenters as well to introduce yourself whenever you're speaking on the phone tonight. Okay, so with that, I'd like to go ahead and introduce Jim McKenna with the Oregon Governor's Office. He's going to provide us with an overview of the Oregon Governor's Office response to the COVID-19 right now. So Jim McKenna, I'll go ahead and pass it to you.
Great, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And you know, I am with the Governor's Natural Resource Office, and obviously this event tonight is for the Portland Harbor Superfund Site, but we all agreed in talking with EPA that with the coronavirus, or what we refer to as COVID-19, getting so much attention lately, it was very important that we address it right up front here at this meeting, because information sharing is obviously the best thing. I am not a professional health specialist, but it's very important that the governor feels that every agency within the state make this a priority. So I just wanted to provide some information to everybody. So first and foremost, why are we so concerned and why all the press coverage? And that's because even though the typical flu season is extremely dangerous, we now have the coronavirus, or as I said, what we call COVID-19, in addition to that. So we're dealing with both. Also, the healthcare professionals are still gathering information and assessing how contagious and virulent this COVID-19 virus is in comparison to influenza. And then finally, we are likely many, many months away from having a readily available vaccine for the COVID-19. So all of that means each and every one of us needs to be vigilant and cautious. In response to the COVID-19, the governor has, as I mentioned, instructed every state agency to make this the #1 priority. To help contain the coronavirus, on March 8th, the governor declared a state of emergency, which gives the Oregon Health Authority and Office of Emergency Management all the resources at the state's disposal to stem the spread of this disease. The declaration allows the Oregon Health Authority to activate reserves of emergency volunteer health professionals to work with local health authorities to identify and contain new cases of COVID-19. The declaration additionally grants broad authority to the state public health director, the Oregon Health Authority, and the Office of Emergency Management to take immediate action to devote all available state resources towards containing the coronavirus. Hot off the presses, the governor is going to have a press conference tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. Because the state is working really hard to bring the very latest information and recommendations to the public. During her press conference tomorrow, she'll be addressing issues such as mass gatherings, social distancing, workplace practices, and other community-wide efforts. I don't have details on what she's going to be presenting tomorrow, so I'm just raising this if this just came to my attention, and I just advise everyone to tune into that press conference tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. So all that being said, I want to run through some of the Oregon Health Authority recommendations to all Oregonians, to all people. And these should be our everyday precautions to prevent the spread of respiratory illnesses like COVID-19 and the influenza. So these are standard practices we should all be employing at this time. So I'll run through the list here. Stay home while you're sick. Never visit a hospital or long-term health facility if you have a fever or cough. You should be covering your cough and sneezes with a tissue and then throw that used tissue in the trash. If you don't have a tissue, sneeze into your elbow. You need to be washing your hands with soap and water, and you should do that washing for at least 20 seconds. And if soap and water are not available, use an alcohol-based sanitizer that contains at least 60% alcohol. Those are all standard practices. You should avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth if your hands have been unwashed. You should clean and disinfect surfaces that have been often touched by others. And you should take care of your overall health. It is so important that you stay current on your vaccines, including the flu vaccine, and eating well and exercising all help your body stay resilient. You can contact the Center for Disease Control. They have a great website that talks about travel guidance if you're thinking of traveling. But I think also I passed on the website link for the Oregon Health Authority to EPA, and I think, Laura, you guys, I don't know if you've disseminated that link to everybody that's on the phone today. Excuse me. But anyone can go online to the Oregon Health Authority. There's a specific link to the coronavirus issue, and it's a fantastic website that gives all the updated information. It's got a list of frequently asked questions. It's got a button if you want to submit a specific question to the Oregon Health Authority. And as I said, it keeps all the updated information on what the state is doing in response to this COVID-19. So again, I recommend people go to the Oregon Health Authority website and look for that coronavirus link. And on top of that, the Oregon Health Authority also offers a phone number, 211. Very simple. You dial 211, and if you wanted just general information on coronavirus, you can get it by hitting the prompt buttons as you go through that. So in short, this is a serious issue. We're taking it seriously. It is the highest priority of the state, and I think all of us need to just take the general precautions to help keep this at bay. That's it, Laura.
Thanks, Jim. Much appreciated. Thank you for sharing all that information and all those great reminders for us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for being here. All right, so the next person that I have to provide us with an introduction is Michael Pouncil. He's with the Community Advisory Group for the Portland Harbor Superfund Site. Michael, are you on the phone and are you able to unmute yourself? I saw a comment about that. Michael, if you're there, if you press #6 on your phone, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Great.
You can hear me now? Okay. Alrighty. Okay. Hello, welcome everyone. I'm Michael Pouncil. I'm Chair of Portland Harbor Community Advisory Group. What I have to share is basically some of our upcoming events that we're doing at the CAG in April. One is that we'll be having the Port of Portland do a presentation on Willamette Cove and the bioremediation that's happening there, and the overall, and also give a presentation on the cleanup effort that the port is doing in conjunction with DEQ at Willamette Cove. Also in May, and that will be April 8th, 2020, and at our 6:30 p.m. is our time that we have our CAG meetings. Also on May 13th of 2020, the City of Portland and the CAG will host a forum for the Information Management Plan that we've been working with the city as well. For everyday people, I like to call it a river library. So that'll be happening May 13th. We are also currently in a comment period with DEQ. Some of us had already talked about that earlier on the outfalls. You can go to the DEQ website. There'll be some more talk about that this evening as well. We are also in the comment period for Willamette Cove as well. There'll be some communication about that too, so we would like everyone's attention and important comments on that there. We're also happy to say that the City of Portland and the state have over 57% of signed agreements for remedial design agreements for Portland Harbor Superfund, which is super exciting. Basically, the whole west side of the Superfund site is in cleanup design agreement. There are some fairly large areas on the east side as well, so we're really happy to say that. We are also excited that hopefully there'll be some cleanup at Cathedral Park, or get some signatures for Cathedral Park for the remediation design there, especially since so many of our close ones use that area and residents in the community. I think that's all I have to share. You guys have a great forum. Thanks everyone for taking out the time to be online tonight. We really appreciate it, and appreciate your patience. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. Really appreciate your updates. And as Michael mentioned, there are several presentations tonight that will provide more information on some of those topics. So thanks again for being here, Michael. All right, so I am going to, and this is Annie's voice, I'm going to go ahead and verbally introduce all the agency staff that are on the phone and either presenting tonight. They're either available for questions or they might be just observing in an agency role. So I'm going to go through each agency and list individuals' names, and then I'll pause at the end just to see if I wasn't able to get to someone, and you can let me know. So from EPA, we have Caleb Schaefer, Sean Sheldrake, Tony Barber, Laura Knudsen, Eva De Maria, Hunter Young, Ben Lake, and Daniel Tardif. From DEQ, we have Dan Hafley and Aaron McDonald, who are both project managers for the Willamette Cove Upland portion. We have Lauren Wordis, Dave Lacey, Alex Liverman, and Nady Novak, which Nady is here in place of Sarah Greenfield while she is on maternity leave until July. With the City of Portland, we have Cindy Riles and Jessica Terlikowski. With Metro, we have Katie Weil. On behalf of the Willamette Cove In-Water Remedial Design Group, we have Josh Bale. From the Port of Portland, we have Dwight Leifel. And then, of course, with Triangle, I have my colleague, Kiz Prusha, who is taking notes tonight and will be producing a meeting summary. Is there anyone else from EPA, DEQ, City of Portland, Metro, or Port of Portland that I didn't mention?
Kevin Perret, DEQ.
Kevin Perret, DEQ, is on the phone, or in person with me, but on the phone. Thank you. All right, great. And Laura Knudsen, are there any congressional representatives or tribal representatives that were able to make tonight's public forum meeting?
Hi, Annie. Thank you, and good evening, everyone. Yes, we have Allison Maeda with Congresswoman Bonamici's office, and she has a special note from Congresswoman Bonamici. She just wanted to thank EPA for the work to get the design agreements signed and move the cleanup forward on behalf of Oregon congressional delegation, including Congresswoman Bonamici. And I'm checking to see if there's anyone else in the room. So we do have Gail Fricano on the webinar tonight, and she represents the 5 tribes on the technical coordinating team. And I'm just doing another quick check. That is all I see. If I'm missing any congressional delegation members or tribal members or tribal representatives, could you please just write in the Q&A pod, and I happily introduce and recognize you and honor you tonight.
Great, thank you, Laura. All right, so this is Annie's voice again. I'm going to quickly go over the agenda because I know we are close on time tonight. So once we get through this welcome portion, which includes an introduction to EPA Portland Harbor Team's new lead, we'll also discuss the signed in-water agreements for remedial design during this welcome portion before we go into our first big chunk of agenda time. So from 6:25 to 7:35, we have opportunities for public feedback and public comment, and there are 3 different pieces that we're going to be covering. We'll be covering the EPA Community Involvement Plan update, which is going to be out and ready for public comment. We'll also be covering the DEQ 30-day public comment period regarding the proposed city outfall source control decision and the update on implementation of the Portland Harbor stormwater strategy to prevent recontamination. And there will also be an update on the Willamette Cove upland cleanup and public comment period on that topic as well. So that's a big chunk of our time tonight, and then we'll take a break if we need it and if we have time for about 10 minutes, and then we'll reconvene from 7:45 to 8:25, and we'll have a presentation in regards to the Willamette Cove in-water cleanup. We have a couple different presenters for that, and during all of these portions of the agenda, we'll have opportunities for question and answer. Like I said, we'll go ahead and wait to answer any of the questions or address the comments until the end of the presentation. We'll wrap up at the end no later than 8:30, and just a reminder now that the next Portland Harbor Public Forum is going to be Wednesday, June 10th, and it will it's tentatively scheduled at the Native American Student Community Center at Portland State University, where we were going to be tonight. Okay, so that gets us through the agenda for tonight. With that, I'd like to introduce Sean Sheldrake. So Sean Sheldrake is the lead EPA project manager, and he's going to be introducing Caleb Schaefer, who is the new Portland Harbor team lead. And then once that piece is covered, Sean, I know you're also going to talk about the signed in-water agreements for remedial design. So I'll pass it over to you, Sean.
Great. Thank you very much, Annie, and hello, everyone. Sorry we're not able to join you tonight. We were really hoping to, but things just evolved the way they evolved. It's my honor to introduce Caleb Schaefer as our new team leader on Portland Harbor. After meeting him, the team is very excited about Caleb joining the team and taking on Davis Zen's former role on the team, as Davis has been promoted onto bigger and better things. I'm also excited to continue on the project as the project coordinator, and what that means is as we have been discussing, as agreements are being signed, we're going to have more and more projects getting into the design process, and the project coordinator at EPA is meant to help conduct and orchestrate that amongst the growing team, and make sure that we're doing things as consistently as possible and moving forward to cleanup as quickly as possible. I'm also continuing as the lead project manager under the Memorandum of Understanding with the technical coordinating team, our partners that help us do all this important work with their critical input into the process going back 20 years I've been on this project. They've really helped us make our approach to cleanup better. We've got a great team. I'm really excited to work with everyone on the team, including Caleb, and move on into full swing for design and later construction soon. And I'm hoping to turn it over to Caleb to introduce himself to you all. And I think we're going to be doing some great things on the project. This is a really exciting time. Thank you. Thank you, Sean. Thanks. So, yeah, just a little bit of background I'd like to share with the group about myself. I've been with EPA now for 17 years. I've been in EPA's Region 9 office, and that covers Arizona, Nevada, Hawaii, and the Pacific Islands in California. I have moved around and have been in a number of programs, done a lot of RCRA work, TSCA work, worked with a lot of tribal governments, and most recently worked in the CERCLA program for the last 11 years. I've been a manager within EPA. I've seen a diversity of Superfund sites and worked on a diversity of Superfund sites, and I look forward to bringing those skills to help further this project. As Sean mentioned, it's a great EPA team here, and it's an exciting time for the project. Moving it forward with the recent remedial design agreements that we have in place, and over half the river that's designated for active remediation, it has now remedial design agreements in place. So it's a very exciting time and a very strong EPA team, and I look forward to contributing to that strong team. So I want to thank you all and look forward to meeting you in person too one day.
Thank you, Caleb and Sean. Thank you for that introduction and being on the webcam. It's helpful to see both of your faces and put a voice to the face, or face to the voice. So, Sean, I know you were also going to talk about the signed agreements, so I'll let you just keep going with that topic. I think you're on mute, Sean.
Thank you, Annie. So we're very pleased to announce, as Caleb said, approximately 57% of the river is now under signed agreement to move forward into design. And as you can see in the red areas that are circled or ovaled on the map here, that includes, as was noted earlier, the entire west or southwest side of the river, and there is a good number of signed agreements also on the north or east side of the river. as we're moving forward to 100% of the river in design. It will be moving into kickoff meetings for all of these different design agreements, and also working towards reaching agreement for these final areas that you'll see noted here in the blue, and that's going to be a significant ramp up for not only the technical coordination team in giving input to EPA on these designs, but also our partners at DEQ. We expect to be doing some of the oversight for this work, as well as a ramp up for our EPA team, of course, in conducting our design oversight for these areas. And as we develop our remedial design guide, that will really help all of our project managers make these designs as consistent as necessary, but also help those designs to be flexible to meet site-specific needs. And as we've been saying, this is a really exciting time because we're really going to be starting to talk about how and where the river needs cleanup specifically, and working with the community on those conceptual designs, getting your feedback on those conceptual designs as we move forward. So I'm really excited to be involved at this part of the process. Chip Humphrey and I always talked about going back to 2000. I was a construction guy at the time, and he said, stick around. It'll be just a couple of years. We're going to get into construction, and we are getting closer by the day. That's all I have, but available for questions if there are any as time allows.
Thanks, Sean. I do have one question that's up on the Q&A right now. So it says, why is Cathedral Park circled in blue?
Cathedral Park is circled in blue because we do not currently have an agreement to move forward for design in that area. And of course, I know, the team knows that's an area heavily utilized for recreation, and we are working towards agreements for those areas, all those areas in blue, that pose risk and that we'll need to assess relative to the RODS decision tree and what focused contaminants of concern are still in those areas, what things may have changed over time. One thing to remember about Cathedral Park is that risks presently at the boat launch and beach area that I frequently use when I'm boating on the river have very low risks absent cleanup. And that's good news, but there are areas in that blue circle that likely will require cleanup and need to go through a design process to determine the wheres and whens. There are other areas in the blue that do have significant elevated fish tissue levels and sediment concentrations that we're working aggressively to get into design.
Thanks, Sean. So I have one more question, and then we'll move on to the next topic. The question is there a timetable for the rest of the agreements to be signed?
There isn't a timetable per se, but I will say that, EPA was very serious in its 100% design goal, at the end of last year. And as you all remember, we went over the variety of tools that we have available to move cleanup forward. And while we can discuss those matters generally, we can't get into matters of enforcement as those are confidential. But I can assure you that the EPA team is working with focus on getting those areas into design.
Thanks, Sean. So I know I said that was the last question, but there's two other ones that I think you can answer quickly, so I'll go ahead and toss them to you. So the first one is, will there be any dredging in the yellow shaded areas?
That's a good question, and as you all may remember, but I'll go over it, the ROD doesn't prescribe cleanup in particular areas per se. Rather, it has a decision tree that gives us a decision-making framework on where to apply active cleanup technologies. And so we're going to embark on data collection in each of those red areas and basically step out our sampling efforts until we find a clean boundary in terms of our action levels. And so while we don't expect areas will grow immensely, some may actually shrink. We're going to act on where the chemicals reside as of the design effort as we move on into cleanup. So there will be some areas where I'm sure the cleanup will need to go into the navigation channel, perhaps. But in other areas, that may be entirely consistent with what you all saw in the record of decision. We'll just have to be guided by the sampling data, and we'll approach the cleanup based on the latest information. There's one exception to that. We do know that there is some contamination in the navigation channel, downstream of the Gasco area, which we'll investigate and see if those areas are still requiring cleanup or not. Similar but different than other areas where we didn't have any data suggesting a problem in the yellow areas that require active cleanup. Any other questions?
Yeah, I think we can do it.
Okay, I think I have one more. Let's see. Where did it go? I hope there one more. Oh, it was the signature.
Yeah, we can do them. Yeah.
Okay. So one more question. It says, OPB published an article today regarding the petition from 4 PRPs to modify the ROD. Could Sean or Laura comment on next steps, when to expect a response from EPA to this petition?
That is a good question, and I'll invite Laura and Caleb to jump in as well. But we just received this petition. We're just getting started to look at it. It is quite lengthy, as you all may have seen, since it's evidently available online now, I'm told. But we will, be formulating some response to that, but it'll take us some time to adequately consider what information has been put in front of us and determine if there's any new information there that we need to consider. We're always open to new information and incorporating that into our work as we go forward.
And this is Caleb. I just add to that is that EPA does remain committed to moving forward with remedial design at this site. And, we've seen some very big movement in that direction, as Sean just went over in the map with these 8 recently signed agreements that account for over half of the acreage designated for active remediation. So we are encouraged by that, and we are committed to moving forward with remedial design for the entire area designated for active remediation.
Thank you, Sean and Caleb. Okay, so that that's all the questions I had on that topic. So thank you both for being available to go over the agreements and give us a high-level overview and provide your answers to those questions. So we are going to transition into the next topic for tonight, which is 3 different opportunities for public feedback and public comment. The first of which is for the Portland Harbor Superfund Site Community Involvement Plan that is being put out by EPA. And I'm going to introduce Laura Knudsen, who is the EPA Region 10 Community Involvement Coordinator, to provide us an overview on this topic. Laura, you're on mute.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And good evening, everyone. As I was starting, thank you so much for being online with us on the webinar this evening and for being on the phone for some of you. I just want to give a quick update. I am the Community Involvement Coordinator for the Portland Harbor Superfund Site, and so I know we're a little bit over time, but I think I can put this back on schedule with a quick update on something that I'm very excited about. If you have been coming to these public forums for the last couple years-ish, something I've been talking about for a while now, and something called the Community Involvement Plan for Portland Harbor. Every Superfund site has one. Portland Harbor's is complex, and we've been working on updating it since the release of the Record of Decision. Jean, next slide, please. Okay, so who developed the draft community involvement plan? So that is EPA. That is under Superfund law. We're supposed to have a community involvement plan. For Portland Harbor, we've had one since the site was listed a little bit after, listed in 2000, the Superfund site, and then the community involvement plan came along shortly after that. Over the years, there have been updates, but not as significant an update as the one that we're doing. After the final cleanup plan is released, the Superfund law directs EPA to revisit the community involvement plan and see if it needs updating. In the case of Portland Harbor, it needed updating. So what did we do? We did interviews with key community leaders, others, partners, such as Port of Portland, City of Portland, some in the business community, people who were interested, and collected all of that feedback and worked to come up with a plan. Now, the point of the community involvement plan, the purpose of it, is to provide basically a map, for how EPA is going to be conducting our community engagement, engaging and involving the community for the cleanup. And so it was a good time to do that updating now. We also received, in addition to formal interviews, informal feedback over the years. These public forums, meetings with community leaders provided a lot of really great feedback that was also incorporated into the plan. And ongoing community involvement also, just all of that anecdotal information really helped with this update. Next slide, please, Jean. So who has reviewed the draft community involvement plan? So, we took all of this work. Annie Kilberg, who's moderating from Triangle, and her colleague Kiz with Triangle have helped me put this community involvement plan together because it's a lot of information and it's an important document. And so we put the draft together, and that was ready back in November, but was it ready for public release? No. So who has been reviewing that draft and providing feedback before it was ready for the unveiling, which is you all get a sneak peek, actually, a little treat since you're on the webinar this evening. We actually have the link ready. So you will be getting it in advance of our public release. So special treat to everyone online this evening. But who reviewed the draft? So EPA Region 10 staff did a review of the draft, provided feedback. We also have something that Sean mentioned in his piece earlier called the Technical Coordinating Team. This team has been in place for a very long time, since the beginning of the Superfund site listing, and it includes all of these groups on the slide here. And we received some really great feedback. It's an internal, or it's a work group, basically, that provides EPA feedback on many different aspects of the cleanup, and it's critical. We have a memorandum of understanding with all of these members, and so the community involvement plan was reviewed by them. We got great comments back from DEQ, from the 5 tribes, from the Yakama Nation that were very helpful in the community involvement plan. We also received other informal feedback. There's a lot of other partners and stakeholders who, I just kind of talk to you about the draft community involvement plan, see if it was going in the right direction, and got a lot of other informal feedback that was incorporated into this draft. Jean, next slide, please. Okay, great. So what changes has EPA made to the community involvement plan, especially from previous ones? We have some of the main changes are listed on this slide, and one, we've just been reducing redundancy, improving the introduction, just overall organization, some of that stuff. We also have developed some new graphics, which we're excited to see what your feedback is on some of those, to try to make different parts of the cleanup more understandable, such as a graphic explaining the different pieces of remedial design, which is, as Sean was saying and Caleb was saying, very exciting because we're getting more agreements for remedial design. So that's an important graphic to look at and an important part of the plan to look at. We also have a tribal background section. We have an environmental justice section, and those are new additions to this version of the community involvement plan. This plan also does provide more clarity on community involvement during remedial design and remedial action, which I know is important for community members, but also for some of those working parties, those potentially responsible parties that have stepped up, for remedial design, who were so encouraged by helping direct, some of their efforts as well. So those are sections that we think are really important in this version. But there are many other changes too that we look forward to having your feedback on. Next slide, Jean, please. Okay, so how are we going to collect feedback? We are going to use primarily a digital platform called Conveo, and my colleague Kiz is going to do a very brief demonstration of Conveo. And the reason why we want to use this platform is because it helps us collect comments in one place. You can actually go to the tool at any time and see other people's comments, reply to those comments. Kiz will do a quick demo of this. It also allows us to have those comments comprehensively collected so we can really view them holistically, which really helps us when we're working to incorporate the feedback. So I'll go over a few more things. We are, Jean actually is going to send out the link to everyone for the draft CIP, but we will be releasing it later tonight or tomorrow to the listserv. We will be posting it online, and I will be sending some individual emails, especially to people who provided interviews, because that was so much time and so much work. There'll be a 45-day feedback period, so it'll end April 27th. So Kiz, Jean, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for a moment. Hold on one moment. Okay. Hold on. All right, you should be able to see. Let me know if you can't see it. Okay, great. So I'm going to put the mouse right where you need it. Okay, all right.
All right, thank you, Laura. Hi, everyone. This is Kiz Prusha. I work with Annie. Like Laura said, I'm just going to do a very quick walkthrough of Conveo for you and how to use this. So first things first, when you go onto the Conveo link and web page, this is the page that you should see. You don't need to worry about logging in, registering, worrying about comments at the top, or worrying about going to the home page. You're going to come into this page, and then what you want to do is scroll down. Just going to scroll. There we go. It's a little slow on the connection. Is it going to load? Yeah, so what you can do is basically you'll be looking at the document here in this dialog box. It's 95 pages. You can click anywhere in this document that you want to add a comment. Not sure why I'm not able to add a comment here.
So that's okay. We're not going to go through the whole demo right now, but
just pull up
we just wanted to show you this.
Kiz, do you want to try refreshing your browser?
Okay, there we go.
Perfect. Great.
Let's go back up. All right.
Thanks so much, Laura. So again, when you get into this page, this is the document that you should see. It should say Portland Harbor Superfund Site Draft Community Involvement Plan. The latest version is March 11th, 2020. And then what you should be able to do is just click anywhere in the document. This dialog window will pop up. You can enter your name. Right now I just have it saying test. It has my email address. And then you can enter your comment here. And then you can add your comment there. Then once you add your comment, which should come up as a little bubble with a number in it, where you left your comment. And then you can click on that. And this is a test comment from earlier that we added in here. And so this is the comment that we added. If I wanted to reply directly to this, or if someone else wanted to reply directly to this, they could. If not, they can just add their comments throughout the document. And other than that, you can just scroll through it and add comments where you see fit. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kez.
Yep.
Okay. We'll go quickly back here. All right, so thanks, Jean. Okay, so next slide. We're almost done. Okay. So we will be, basically you can provide comments via Conveo. Jean, I'm not seeing the slide advance, but maybe it has, and our connection is just not the best. Thank you. Okay, next slide. Thank you. All right, so basically you can use Conveo, but if you need another method for commenting, please email harborcomments@epa.gov. All this information will be in the listserv announcement and online. Or contact Kiz, who you just saw. His information is here. That information also will be in the listserv announcement and online. Next slide, Jean. Great, thank you. So we already basically talked about Conveo. However, EPA, how will your feedback be incorporated? This is an important piece that sometimes gets lost, I know, the feedback loop. So we do want to circle back on, feedback that's received. It's important. So we will be reviewing all the comments received, incorporating, necessary revisions and suggestions that we think should be made to the CIP based on those. And then we will be providing a high-level summary, 2-page fact sheet on key updates to the CIP and also a summary of the comments received and revisions made. And, if that fact sheet is not enough, we're happy to provide additional clarification on how your feedback was incorporated. Next slide, Jean. That is it. Concluded. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Laura. Great job to you and Kiz. Okay. So I don't think that there's any questions popping up on the Q&A pod. So if people have questions for Laura about the community involvement plan, please go ahead and type those in now. I'll just wait a few moments. I did get one comment that said, love the new way to provide comments on Conveo, so that's exciting.
Thank you. We hope you like it. It can be frustrating for some people, so please contact us. Please let us know. We can find other ways, but we would like to try out that tool.
Yeah, great. Okay, wonderful. So let's keep going, Laura, if that's okay, since there's no questions about the CIP. You'll be seeing that in your email inboxes if you're part of the Portland Harbor listserv, either tonight or tomorrow morning. And we'll look forward to seeing your comments, and we'll have a 45-day turnaround. Okay, so I'm going to switch us to the next topic, which is the DEQ 30-day public comment period on the Portland Harbor proposed city outfall source control decision and DEQ's update on implementation of the Portland Harbor stormwater strategy to prevent recontamination. So we have Alex Liverman with DEQ and Cindy Riles with the City of Portland tonight, going to be providing a presentation on this topic. I have about 15 minutes for the presentation. Is that still okay with both of you? Okay, great. So I'll turn it to you, and then do we want to share the webcam too? Okay. Wonderful. So I'll hand it over to the two of you. Thanks for being here tonight.
Great. If you could advance the first slide, please. This is Alex Liverman with DEQ, and I wanted to start off by acknowledging that there's lots of things going on in Portland Harbor right now. With all those remedies getting signed up for and being designed, it might be difficult to track some of these great advancements. DEQ and the city have been working on stormwater in Portland Harbor for about 20 years, since before the Superfund site was listed. And we've given various updates on the stormwater work to the CAG and to the TCT over these years, but now we're getting to the place where we're ready to propose a decision on source control of the city's outfalls into Portland Harbor. And so we started engaging community members last week and letting them know that we're presenting information tonight to start that engagement process. And what we are very interested in is hearing questions from you about, after you hear our summary tonight, what information would be helpful for you, or what forums would be helpful to get additional information so that you can actively participate in that comment period. I want to point out that we have not set a date for that review period yet, because we were planning on taking this month to get some education and outreach going, and we'll do that in response to the needs that we hear from you tonight and in the coming days. So think about that and let us know. And we typically do set a 30-day public comment period. We don't have a requirement to do public notice for source control decisions, but we do follow our typical rules. And so we're open to extending that if there's a need. And both Cindy and I, as well as other staff, will be available during the public comment period to answer your questions or point you to information, reports, and things that are available publicly that will be helpful in that review. And then, of course, we will consider all the comments received on this proposed decision before finalizing it. And we will handle those by making changes as needed to the document and providing responses for others that are relevant. Next slide, please. So I wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of the Portland Harbor stormwater strategy in general. And you can see a pretty good time chronology here of important events that have occurred, including that 1999 start to the outfalls investigation. And we've gone through collectively and created guidance, worked together as a group to come up with a strategy. And the reason that we did that for stormwater in particular is because recontamination has happened at sediment sites in the nation and in the Pacific Northwest, and some by the stormwater pathway. So while we took that very seriously, EPA and DEQ, we wanted to make sure that we started working on that to prevent it in Portland Harbor. And we're in a unique situation here. DEQ and the city began partnering in the early 2000s, and the intent was to make sure that we understood the potential for recontamination from stormwater and that we could take effective steps to prevent it. And we're here tonight to explain how we've done that and why we feel confident that we are effectively controlling any potential for recontamination from stormwater. Those three components on the right of the screen are the components of the stormwater strategy that was collectively settled on, and I'll go through each of those components. Firstly, it's very important to control any upland legacy historical sources of contamination that could mobilize in stormwater and get into the harbor. And we've been doing that by comprehensively applying the Joint Source Control Strategy, that 2005 document that we came up with, and we're looking at all pathways, but in particular I'll talk about stormwater. That covers the 39 city outfall basins, ODOT basins, and we've screened 500 individual sites and evaluated 173 under the stormwater guidance. We've also done work upriver of the Portland Harbor, both in the uplands and in water. And importantly, for stormwater specifically, we did 2 site discovery events in 2007 and 2013, where we sampled stormwater solids from 17 sites to determine if they needed to come into the cleanup program to deal with that. So on the second component of the strategy, that's really aimed at ongoing discharges. We know it continues to rain here in the Pacific Northwest, and there'll be a considerable requirement to continue to regulate those stormwater discharges, particularly from industries. The way that we've been handling that is through our 1200Z industrial stormwater general permit, and that's become iteratively more stringent over time.
For instance, in 2012, we started getting monitoring for all of the contaminants that the waterway is listed for and that it's impaired for. And those are parallel to the contaminants that are of concern in Portland Harbor. And then in 2017, we added Portland Harbor specific benchmarks, including a reduced total suspended solids requirement. And we also expanded the permit to require 25 additional facilities to apply. So we now have more than 100 sites that are under that permit that discharge in Portland Harbor, and another almost 100 that are under what's called no exposure certifications. And under that permit program, we get ongoing monitoring and corrective action when there's exceedances, and then we get to adaptively manage that permit every 5 years, like we did in 2012 and 2017. And then the third component there on the right is the monitoring and adaptive management. So with any strategy going forward, we want to make sure that it's effective and that we have the flexibility and agility to adapt to a need that might emerge. And so here in Portland Harbor, we're continuing to complete all the source control processes that are underway at individual sites. And we're also continuing to implement the 1200Z permit that I talked about. And then if you look on the chronology, in 2017, DEQ undertook a stormwater-specific contaminant loading study to see how we were doing on effectiveness and gauge what additional monitoring and adaptive management we might need. I'll talk a little bit about that. And lastly, we're continuing to partner with EPA on source control sufficiency assessments, and that looks at all the pathways for recontamination, and it's an opportunity to gather more information on stormwater specifically as needed. Next slide, please. So a little bit about that strategy, the study we did on contaminant loading specifically from stormwater. We looked at these 5 sites, these 5 areas of the harbor that are outlined in red, which makes up pretty much most of the harbor, and definitely focused on areas that had the most potential for recontamination from stormwater because they are either off-channel quiescent areas like the International Slip up at the top or the Swan Island Lagoon. And then the heavily industrialized, densely developed areas like the River Mile 6 to 8 West and 9 West areas there. And these also, along with the River Mile 11 East area, have high concentrations of contaminants offshore. And so we want to make sure that all the sites that could contribute were identified and controlled. And in doing so, we looked at, well, what are those discharges composed of? And we looked at 5 contaminants, PCBs, PAHs, phthalates, zinc, and total suspended solids. Next slide, please. And here are some of the results of what our study found, that we have some significant reductions in those contaminants. Looking at these 4 charts, the columns on the left of each of them represent data that was collected up until 2010. And then you'll recall that from the chronology that you just saw, the stormwater guidance came into place in 2009. And the permit requirements came into place in 2012. And so during those time periods, we had much more implementation of source control measures. And so we have the column on the right that reflects data collected in 2017. So it's a pretty good cut between before source control measures were implemented and after source control measures were implemented. And so we see here quite good reductions. The orange bars are PCBs at almost 80%. The yellow chart is PAHs in the 60% range, and then slightly lower but still significant reductions in phthalates in blue and zinc in the silver. So even though stormwater is a very small portion of the overall water flow and sediment flow in the very large Willamette River, we've made some significant reductions in these contaminants from these heavily industrialized facilities and are really on the right track for how we're going forward. So I'm going to turn it over now to Cindy to give you an overview of how the city's outfall work has really contributed to these great results. And I'll then come back and give you some conclusions on how we're viewing that work and summarize the decision for you and give you some conclusions on this stormwater loading study that we've done.
Great. Thank you very much, Alex. Next slide, please. My name is Cindy Riles. I work for the City of Portland. I'm a technical program manager, and my work in part involves running the city's source control program. I'm going to go through just 4 slides here that summarizes 20 years of city partnership with DEQ. And I'm going to focus on some of the questions that the city has already received from the community to help better understand source control. So for a lot of folks, this may be a refresher. For some folks, this may be new information. Updates have been given periodically, as Alex has said, to the public, but we know that there's always new people engaged and interested in learning what's going on. So to start out, this is a goal, or it's worded as a definition of source control, and that is the process of identifying, evaluating, and controlling sources of contamination that may reach the Willamette River. And there's also a note there that says upland source control should be completed to the extent practicable prior to sediment cleanup in the Superfund site. And this quote is directly from a joint source control strategy, which was one of the early documents developed with DEQ in the lead when they were trying to figure out what needs to happen for source control. I'm going to talk specifically about the city's source control work, which is stormwater related. There's other sources of contamination. The upcoming proposed city outfall source control decision is specifically about stormwater, and it's specifically about stormwater that goes through the city's conveyance system. You'll see that picture off to the right is a really good example of a source that's not controlled, and it looks like maybe that might be draining to someone's conveyance system, which may lead to an outfall, which may lead to a river. So next slide, please. So this is a map of the harbor, and you've seen so many maps of the harbor that river through the middle should look familiar, but what may look a little bit different to you is the outline of the land surrounding the river. And that land surrounding the river has been clipped in this map to show the area that drains stormwater to the river, or potentially drains stormwater to the river. In addition, you'll see there's a lot of dots along the shoreline up and down the river. There's orange dots, which represent private outfalls, and there's yellow dots, which represent city outfalls. You'll see there's a lot more private outfalls than city outfalls. There's over 300 private outfalls, and there's about 35 active city outfalls. Of that area in the upland that potentially drains to the harbor, that's about 12,000 acres, and about half of that eventually drains into the city conveyance system. And at the bottom of that screen, there's a lot of green area. The local folks will recognize that as Forest Park. Much of the city drainage area actually comes from Forest Park. And so Alex talked a little bit about the loading analysis that DEQ did and source control strategy. And when we look at prioritizing areas for source control, we often look at the land uses that may be contributing sources. So Forest Park, for example, it's a forested area. There's no known contaminant sources there. That's generally not considered a high contributing factor to contaminants in the river. Next slide, please. This slide just summarizes kind of the main tenets of the city's source control work over the years. We're really proud of this work. As Alex said, it's been 20 years of partnership between city and DEQ on stormwater source control. We feel like we've really been leaders in moving this work forward. We're really unique in Portland Harbor in that sources are very near fully controlled right at the time when remedial design is happening. So that's a huge plus for the river, particularly a source control decision such as the city outfalls, because that is a hurdle in moving forward with the cleanup that we don't have to worry about anymore. The source control decision tells us that You know, sources involving the city conveyance system are controlled through city, state, and federal programs. And in order to get to that point, you know, our strategy is really the bullets you see up here. It's protection of the public conveyance system is a shared responsibility. The city stormwater conveyance system is a public asset, and so it's a shared responsibility to protect it. Control contaminants at the source. This is a really important one to keep in mind, particularly for those who may be reviewing the proposed source control decision. The city did not create chemicals and throw them in our conveyance system, right? They originated because Portland Harbor is an industrial sanctuary, and very important work goes on there, and that work requires the use of chemicals. But those chemicals need to be managed at their source where they're used. So working with DEQ to make sure that happened over the years was pivotal to the success of this work. In addition, that second to last bullet down there, city and DEQ regulatory programs were evaluated and improved as needed. This again speaks to the great partnership between the two agencies over the years. DEQ has regulatory authority that the city does not, and likewise the city has regulatory authority that DEQ does not. And so by working together to really make sure sources are controlled at the source and we're updating our respective programs as needed, showed that this work is successful. And finally, you know, how do you know when you're done? Why are we getting this source control decision now after 20 years? And that has to do with continuous monitoring and the adaptive management that Alex talked about as well. The city has conducted monitoring at the bottom of our basins, really close to the outfalls, to see if all of these programs we have in place and controlling sources at the source is working. And what our most recent monitoring shows is that, yes, it is working. After 20 years of fine-tuning and testing and checking everything out, we know now that the programs we have work when they're fully implemented. Next slide. That said, source control never ends. And the city is really excited about this source control decision. We think it's a huge step in moving forward and stating that sources from the city's conveyance system are sufficiently controlled to be able to move forward with cleanup once these programs are fully implemented. But at the same time, we need to make sure that these programs continue to be implemented and continue to work. And up here is just a mishmash of all of the intersection of different programs and regulatory agencies and laws, frankly, that contribute to source control in the river. So it's not just CERCLA, it's not just Portland Harbor. There's a wide variety of folks and programs and good work involved in making sure that the river doesn't become recontaminated. So with that, I'll send it back over to Alex to talk in a little bit more detail about the city outfall proposed source control decision.
Great. Next slide. Thank you. So I want to just let you know that the proposed decision is going to summarize all the history that we just shared in a very high-level fashion. There's a little bit more depth in the document, and all the data and the information is presented in a comprehensive way to help you understand how that decision was made. What you're seeing on the slide now is the criteria for making the source control decision, and that was developed prior to the joint source control strategy being developed. But we've aligned this with those materials and with the guidance that came in 2009, and that's similar to how all sites are regulated and how we make those decisions. So we are looking at the city's 39 outfall basins, and as Cindy mentioned, only 35 of them are still active, and they drain commingled site discharges from Forest Park streams and in total they make up about half of the stormwater discharge into Portland Harbor. And so the effectiveness monitoring and the good work we've seen also confirm the conclusions that we're making in the Portland Harbor Stormwater Strategy Update. We'll be publishing that document with the loading study information in it before this public notice for the city decision. So you'll have that as a companion document to help you make sense of some of this information. So the basins we found to be very well characterized. There are nearly 80 reports that the city has developed in all of those basins, and all of those are available publicly, so you can use those in reviewing the information as well. We found that the source control measures were broadly applied and very effectively implemented, and they include a wide variety of measures that the city has implemented, including ponds and swales and inline treatment features, as well as line cleanouts to remove legacy sediment, which is a very effective source control measure. And there's also many site-specific source control measures that have been implemented and that contribute to those results. And importantly, as Cindy mentioned, there's programmatic elements that are applied by the city, such as the stormwater management manual and the source control manual, which are triggered each time a site does redevelopment. And those programmatic elements are applied throughout all of the basins in the city, so whether they discharge to Portland Harbor or not. And so we get good overall water quality improvement from those things, and in an ongoing fashion. So the monitoring, we have monitoring at the bottom of the basins, 29 of the active 35 basins. And what the monitoring shows, and will be provided in detail in the proposed decision document, is that we have decreasing trends across the board in all the contaminant concentrations and loads, which is great news and a very nice showing of the effectiveness of these measures. We also have screened those results against the cleaning level, the cleanup levels for surface water in Portland Harbor, and screening level values that are in the Joint Source Control Strategy. And while we have some exceedances of some of those conservative values, that's very similar to what we see at other sites. And importantly, those concentrations fall below the flat portion of the rank order curves that DEQ developed and are available in our guidance, and is a line of evidence that we apply at every site. So that indicates that the concentrations that we see out of the city outfalls are very typical of urbanized and highly industrialized areas, and not a significant source that would contaminate a waterway like Portland Harbor was contaminated in the past. So that's great news that we can make the findings that the sediment is not going to be recontaminated by these minimal discharges, and that in-water risk is also not going to be of concern due to these stormwater discharges. And then the last piece is we have an adaptive management ongoing monitoring program that is under agreement with the city and DEQ, so that we have tools ongoing for continuing to make sure that these programs continue to be implemented and that we get these results and see decreasing trends go forward. Next slide, please. One more slide on the kind of conclusions from the Portland Harbor Stormwater Loading Study that we did. And it's important to note that this situation that we have, because we're proactive and partnered early and focused on recontamination from stormwater, we are very different than those sites where we have seen recontamination occur. So, for instance, our combined sewage overflows have been controlled. So between 2001 and 2011, that was taken off the plate, and that is the leading cause of recontamination when stormwater is the culprit at other sites. We just don't have that problem here. We also have a very well-investigated conveyance system from the city's outfalls, as well as other outfalls and basins within the Portland Harbor. And as Cindy mentioned, nearly half of the discharge that comes in the form of stormwater through outfalls into Portland Harbor comes from Forest Park. And the loading study shows that, as we all suspected, that Forest Park water is very clean. It's more than half of the discharge, but less than 1% of the load of contaminants. So that's a great piece of information in our favor that also does not occur at other sites where recontamination has happened. And then, of course, the 2 decades of comprehensive source control implementation and the permits that is focused on Portland Harbor, that will continue. The results of the loading study show both loads and concentrations trending down throughout the harbor up to 80%, which is great news. And then the volumes of stormwater that come out come from those outfalls into the harbor in an annual basis are very tiny in comparison to the Willamette River volume. Similar, and a component of loading, is that the total suspended solids load is also quite low compared to the total suspended solids load in the Willamette itself. And we know that that is decreasing because we have permit limits, and we see that in the data that we've collected and analyzed on the loading evaluation. Another important point is all the modeling to date that has been done on recontamination of the sediment shows that all of the stormwater coming in, even at high concentration, is basically masked by the massive amounts of sediment that comes down the river every day with those large flows of that very large ninth order stream. And so we feel confident making a conclusion that on a harbor-wide scale and even at a geo-region scale, area by area, active cleanup area scale, recontamination is just not going to happen from the stormwater pathway. And as Cindy mentioned, it's important for us to keep the source control moving and get it completed, and that will also help us prevent any of these site-specific potentials for recontamination. So it's important for us to focus on that work and take the opportunity during the source control sufficiency assessments to look at additional data and additional loading analyses as needed on the stormwater pathway. Last slide, please. In conclusion, we want to keep those things going. DEQ is committed to completing source control. We're very near completion at most sites, and we will also continue to implement the stormwater regulations in the permits, and then review that monitoring as it comes in and adaptively manage it. We're also continuing to coordinate with EPA to make sure that those source control sufficiency assessments are addressed as they come up, and that additional information is collected as needed. We're confident that the implementation of the active sediment remedies will remove the larger potential sources of recontamination, and that stormwater won't be contributing to that. And then finally, we have an overarching kind of adaptive management plan with post-remedy monitoring to early on detect if we've missed anything and there is a recontamination threat that we then need to address. And so we'll be able to take action with agility to meet that need. And that's what you're going to see in that document that gets released in March, and then the public notice for the proposed city outfall decision will be hopefully at the end of March. And if you have questions, you can talk to us. On the last slide is our contact information, and if you have questions, we will take those now.
Great. Thanks, Alex. Cindy. Okay, so I have 3 questions that we'll try to get through quickly. And so first one is for Alex and Dave Lacey. Are there any investigations into potential contamination due to leaking storage containers along the bank?
I'm thinking that the question is about underground storage tanks potentially, and DEQ has a program in our cleanup collection of programs that does look at underground storage tanks.
Yeah, I'm just thinking right now if I can think of any specific ones that are adjacent to the river, and I cannot think of any specific ones.
But as we do source control investigations, we do look at every potential pathway. So we look at groundwater, we look at the soil and overland flow, we look at any past releases, and those can happen from underground storage tanks. But we are addressing those through our cleanup authorities as we find them, and on each site that we have in the program, that would be looked at.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, so next question is estimated stormwater load a guess?
Well, it depends on how you feel about modeling and engineers. So when you see the Portland Harbor stormwater-specific contaminant loading study, you'll see the model that we set up, pretty simple spreadsheets, and there's an equation for how we estimate loads we do those estimates in a very conservative way, and so we used 18,000 data points, so they are not guessed at as far as their measured concentrations are used, and estimated flows are used based on the rainfall annually. So we used 45 inches of annual rainfall, measured concentrations of contaminants, and there's an estimation in the equation for the solids that are leaving the site to get the load. So we call it estimated because it is not a direct measurement, but it is based on direct measurements and modeled best case scenario, best information. And it's a pretty widely used model called the Schuler simple method, and that information is explained in the report.
All right, next question is, what percentage of outfalls are private? It sounds like 90%.
Yeah, that's pretty accurate, and so public outfalls would be from the City of Portland, from ODOT, and from the Port of Portland, and Multnomah County. I guess we just call the bridge the Broadway Bridge. Then the other outfalls are private because they are either directly controlled and contributed to by sites that are directly adjacent to the river, and that's the majority of those 300 are direct discharges from a small area of a site right next to the river. And then a few of the private outfalls, they're not really owned by anyone. Certainly nobody claims them, but they function similar to public outfalls in that they collect stormwater from multiple different sites and commingle it and combine it together into a single outfall discharge. And those are far fewer. The vast majority of those 300 orange dots that you saw on Cindy's map are small direct discharges right there from those docks, right there from those sites that are bordering the river.
Okay. So I know there's more questions coming in, but we do need to move on to the next presentation. So I would encourage you, and you can tell me, Cindy and Alex, if this is correct, should folks just use that contact information to email you their questions? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'll just go ahead and suggest you all do that, and then we'll also make sure that they're documented somehow with our webinar in case you need to follow up with us somehow. Okay, so thank you, Alex, and thank you, Cindy. We really appreciate you being here. We're going to transition over to the update on the Willamette Cove Upland cleanup and the public comment period with Dan Hafley. Dan's going to come over here in the hot seat. And the camera's right over there, so if you want to sit in front. And Dan, just checking, because we're a little bit behind schedule, about how long do you need for the update piece?
10 to 15, but the slides are simple, and I think we can go through pretty quickly.
Okay, all right. Thank you. So Dan Hafley is the DEQ project manager, and I'll just leave it to you to dive right in.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, everybody. It's really nice to have the opportunity to spend a few minutes and talk about, to provide you with an update on the ongoing cleanup activities at the upland portion of the Willamette Cove site. I'm here along with team member Aaron McDonald, who's the PM, and we're looking to impart some information that we hope is going to be helpful. Next slide. So we have about 20 slides, but really a lot of attention might be focused on this first slide because we want to we didn't want to bury the lead, and we wanted to put kind of the most important information right at the front of the presentation. So here are the 4 takeaways relative to what's going on with Willamette Cove. DEQ has proposed a cleanup plan for the upland portion of the site. Okay, and this action is separate from the work that's being done on Willamette Cove by EPA under the Superfund program, which would be in the bank line and in the river. So it's an important distinction between the two. Third, we are currently in the public notice and comment process. We are accepting comments on the proposed remedy for the upland. We are also engaging with the public. We've had some meetings already, and we will have future meetings to kind of daylight what's going on with respect to selection of a cleanup plan. And finally, and we'll talk about this at the end of the presentation, there will be an opportunity to submit comments in multiple ways. So that is kind of the takeaway, and now we're going to kind of real quickly dig into some of the details. So next slide, please. So we're going to cover these topics. We're going to kind of walk through the site pretty quickly in terms of, and once again, we're focusing on the upland portion of the site. We're going to talk about what the problem is, the roles and responsibilities of EPA and DEQ, what is the status of the cleanup work, what does our cleanup proposal look like, how people can get more info on the project and submit comments, and what's next. Next slide, please. So, in terms of what the problem is, most of you probably know this is a property. This slide shows Willamette Cove. It shows both the upland, which is delineated by the red line, and the adjacent in-water, which would be to the, let's call it slide south. And there were two main activities that historically that occurred for decades at this property. There were dry dock operations that incorporated both the upland and the in-water, and that's shown in what's called the central parcel of the site, including two large in-water dry docks. And also there were, we'll call them lumber manufacturing activities, both on the west parcel and the east parcel. On the west parcel, it was fairly standard lumber milling operations. On the east parcel, it was a cooperage, which is a barrel manufacturing facility. One thing that's clear from this illustration is that very expansive industrialization, and including not only the upland, which we're covering today, but also the in-water. Next slide, please. Now, of course, Willamette Cove looks very different today. All of the industrial structures have been removed. The property is currently owned by Metro, and they envision it as a natural space. And we're kind of in a period of transition where all of the industrial structures have been removed, and we're working towards that ultimate vision of Metros, of this being a public space that can be used by, the Portland community. And I think everybody looks at this as an important resource, being one of the few publicly owned properties within the Portland Harbor. Next slide, please. So what is the problem with the upland? Well, it's quite simple. We're going to talk for a little bit about the whole site, but then we'll focus on our part, which is the upland. We have extensive contamination in all areas of the site, upland, riverbank, and in the water. We have a variety of contaminants, some of them which are quite toxic. Most notably, we have widespread dioxin contamination, we have metals and PCBs. And really, the contamination is present across the site. And really kind of one of the important elements of this is that it's located right in the heart of the Portland Harbor Superfund Site, as we'll show you on the next slide. So this is an illustration of, you can see the Willamette River running from the downtown area north towards Multnomah Channel, some of the classical, kind of geographic features of the Superfund site. The site is located, I think you can click one ahead to show the location of the, there we go. So there's the Superfund site illustrated in yellow. And I think if we click forward one more, we'll show the location of Willamette Cove. So it's in approximately river mile 6.8 on the east bank of the Willamette River. Now, an important point with this is that, and what we're going to talk about next is who is responsible for what. And the takeaway is that EPA is responsible for the bank line and in-water, and DEQ is responsible for the upland cleanup. And we're going to kind of segue to the next slide that shows that, I think, a little bit more readily. So here is the schematic. In its simplest terms, you have the upland, which extends, it's basically all of the flatline land that is available above the riverbank. So that is the responsibility of DEQ in terms of determining the nature of extent of contamination and selecting a remedy. And of course, we're in the process of selecting a remedy. Separately, there is the ongoing work under EPA, which is covering the riverbank and the in-water. And later today, later tonight, there'll be more discussion of that. Next slide. So in terms of the parties that are involved in working on this, it's a bit of a three-legged stool. So DEQ is the regulatory oversight agency, Metro is the site owner, and an active participant in the cleanup. And the Port of Portland has a central role in terms of the cleanup work. And the work is being done under a consent order that was signed between DEQ, Metro, and the Port in 2000. Next slide. So what work has been done so far in the upland? Well, what we call the determination of the nature and extent of the contamination in terms of what are the chemicals, what are the chemical contaminants, where are they found, what are the levels of contamination. That characterization has been completed. Along with that, so has the risk analysis that has determined what actual threat is posed by those chemicals to two kind of groups, both humans and also to plants and animals. So human and ecological risk. There was an important partial cleanup action in the upland site in 2015 and 2016. Over 5,000 cubic yards of contaminated soil were removed and taken to an off-site landfill. And that work was focused on some of the most egregious or the worst human health hotspots. So some of the soil that had the most highly concentrated contamination. So we've actually made quite a bit of progress in terms of removing contamination in the site. And now we're really essentially at the fourth item here, which is we've completed an analysis and determined, or we're proposing a cleanup plan for the upland. Next slide. So there are a couple of important elements to get to a cleanup plan. One has to do a feasibility study, which is looking at different remedial options or cleanup options. That was done by the Port and Metro and subsequently approved by DEQ. An important element of that is looking at the full range of remedial options. And we're going to talk about the types of cleanup actions you can perform. Some are very old school and classic, like dig and haul, and some are a lot more technically sophisticated. We looked at the full range, but I think you'll be interested to see what we came up with. Next slide. So, we have a menu of cleanup. We developed a menu of cleanup options for the site. And, what goes into that, there are a lot of considerations in terms of the type of contaminants, the range of contaminants, the levels of contamination. And, a lot of it gets down to can the contamination be treated, say, for example, made inert through chemical or thermal or other processes, bioremediation, or is it really a matter that we're kind of down to the kind of classical cleanup strategies of what we call dig and haul, excavation and either on an off-site disposal, or an isolation technology like capping. Next slide, please. So the challenges with what we have at the site, in terms of trying to select a remedy for the site, first you'll see we have multiple contaminants that are largely resistant to some of the classic treatment methods. Things like dioxins, metals, and PCBs, they're highly toxic, they're persistent in the environment, and also they're relatively difficult to treat, quote unquote. Another big factor is that the cleanup standards that we are applying to the site based on the current and reasonably likely future use, notably for dioxins, are very low concentrations. For example, I think the cleanup level for protecting the most sensitive ecological receptor at the site is 16 parts per trillion. And 16 parts per trillion is a low number. And finally, there's another really big consideration is we want to look at developing a cleanup strategy that recognizes the potential impacts and minimizes the impacts to neighborhoods, and also try to minimize the carbon footprint to the extent possible. So when we're kind of looking at this stew of remedial or cleanup strategies, there are a lot of different things that go into figuring out what is the best one for the site. Next slide, please. So now, and then what you lay on top of that is we have a regulatory process. And there are really two levels to our regulatory process that are important for tonight. The first is, and it's illustrated up at the top, is any cleanup strategy that we select for a site has to be protective of public health and the environment. There's no way around that. The first rule of identifying a cleanup strategy is it has to be protective. The second tier of that is that Oregon rules require us to look at what are called balancing factors, and there's 5 of them that are shown here. The remedy to, we have to balance effectiveness versus implementability, the implementation risk, the long-term reliability of the strategy, and also cost effectiveness. But we consider those, but remember, we always have to default to whatever we select, it has to be protected. Next slide. So we've kind of put the site and the potential remedial alternatives through kind of the process, and here's what came out of it. First off, what are we trying to protect out there? Well, based on the information that's been provided by the site owner Metro, we have been told that we need to protect for future recreational and park users, construction workers, the houseless, and plants and animals. And using those endpoints that we have to protect, we came up with a 3-part strategy for addressing contamination in the upland soil. The first is removal of the most highly concentrated material, and that includes the remaining what are called human health hotspots. As I mentioned before, in 2015 and 16, most of those were removed, some remain, and we're basically recommending that all of that material go off-site to a landfill so it doesn't pose a risk to any site user in the future. A second really important component is to take most of the remaining soil that has excess or poses an excess risk and consolidate and cap that material on site. And we'll show you an illustration of how that might look in a minute. And we're thinking with the first 2 items here that most, if not all, of the eco and human health risk will be addressed through those actions. The last piece of it is there may be areas where we have kind of modest residual risk, and there would be an element of placing what's called clean cover over those areas. It's a little bit different in capping because in some cases the levels that remain are low enough that really a simple cover, maybe a foot of clean material, may be adequate for long-term protection. Now, so those are the 3 main components of the proposed cleanup action. Now, with both the consolidate and cap and the clean soil, an important element of this is there's going to have to be long-term monitoring and maintenance. So anytime somebody puts a cap on a site, that has to be maintained in perpetuity. And there will be a very rigorous plan put in place for managing that, and there'll be ongoing inspections, review by DEQ, et cetera. Next slide. So this is kind of the concept, a little bit more graphically. This is the site, and you can see the west parcel kind of on the left side, the skinnier central parcel in the middle, and then the east parcel on the south side. And then you have these 4 icons representing the different remedial strategies. Red being removal, kind of the orange being the consolidation, the whatever you want to call that, yellowish being the cover, and also another element we haven't talked about yet, but there is there are some wonderful native trees on this property. that I know that the Metro and others, I think, would really try to preserve if at all possible. So another kind of twist to this or element is there would be a great effort in terms of native tree preservation. So what you can see with this illustration is that the red areas where we have additional hotspot material, those would be dug up and taken off-site to a landfill, perhaps Hillsborough landfill, something like that. A lot of the just kind of area-wide contamination that falls in kind of this moderate range would be consolidated and would be capped in the area that says consolidation area in the kind of the south end of the property. A very important, that would have to be an engineered structure, and an important consideration with that is to make sure, A, that it's stable from flooding or resistant to flooding, and also seismically as well. So there would be a whole design process for creating the consolidation cell that would consider those and a number of other factors. And there might be, like we said, there might be some cover areas where we have low-level residual risk in various parts of the site. So that is the cleanup concept. And once again, remember, we're covering the upland site. There will be a completely different cleanup concept that will be overseen by EPA for the riverbank portion of the site and for the in-water part of the site. Next slide. So where do we go next with this? We are in the public notice and comment period, and the comment period ends on May 2nd, I believe, May 1st, 2020. What I want to talk about now is how you can get more information about the action that the DEQ is proposing. And you see 4 ways to get additional information on the screen here. And I think we've talked about making a way for this information to be readily accessible by the public. And Lauren, did you want to talk about that?
Sure. So I believe that right now, if you were to, that you can click on your screen where it says DEQ website, where it looks like the moderator here has put that in your chat screen. So you can go there and just have that up to yourself right now. And in addition, at the end of this whole presentation, at the very, very conclusion, there will be an opportunity to download documents that, including this PowerPoint presentation. So if you want the whole thing, you can download that, and the moderator will walk you through how to do that at that time.
Yeah. And I think for people that are looking at this and wanting more information, I think some of so we have a fact sheet, for example, or an executive summary that talks about the cleanup that we're proposing. We also, there's a document that DEQ has created called a staff report, which outlines the proposed remedial action. So if someone wants to dig a little deeper, they can read the staff report. If they have questions, they can call Aaron. And we do have quite a bit of information loaded up in our XC database. That's the ECSI database. Let's go to the next slide and talk about public comment. So we are, once again, there's a 60-day public notice and comment period for the proposed cleanup strategy for the upland Willamette Cove. Of course, today we're in March now, so we're well into the public comment period, but we have a ways to go. There are 3 ways articulated on the screen for people to submit comments, and I think we're going to be passing on that information to folks. We also are going to have, I would just point out that we are going to have future public meetings, the most notable being in April. We're going to have a formal presentation and probably a more in-depth discussion of the actual cleanup strategy that's being proposed at the CAG meeting. And Erin, is there anything else you want to add?
Yeah, the CAG presentation definitely would be, we'd go into a lot more depth about the actual cleanup plan that DEQ is proposing. I think we have an hour and a half.
Yeah.
So I'm expecting the presentation to be at least a half an hour, 45 minutes with 45 minutes of Q&A.
So we would encourage people to show up if you're interested, attend that and bring your questions, and there'll be a lot of great information that's passed on during that.
Yeah, and it is a month away, so in the meanwhile, read up as much as you. I encourage people to look at the website, read what they, to the extent they want, and then contact me if you have questions.
And then I think there's one final slide. Yes, so next steps. So after we get through the public notice and comment period, we will look at all of the comments, carefully consider all the comments, and in fact, we typically prepare a response to comments, and we will use that to prepare what's called a record of decision, which outlines the final cleanup strategy that we're selecting for the Willamette Cove Islands. And thank you for your time. We have a pretty picture at the end.
Great. Very pretty. Thank you. All right, so we do have a couple questions in the queue. First question, I think, is for Dan or Dave, possibly. So has upland contamination been characterized for all of Portland Harbor or just for the Willamette Cove?
Well, the study we're talking about now strictly relates to Willamette Cove. Certainly there are upland investigations going on or have been completed all over Portland Harbor. This discussion is specific to the Willamette Cove site.
Okay. Thank you. Great. So next question I have here for Dan. Where are the native tree preservation areas on the map?
Katie, do you want to handle that? I'm asking Katie with Metro, who is intimately familiar with the native trees.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yeah, Katie, did you hear the question?
I did, about where the native tree protection is, and I'm very glad somebody asked that question. And I'm also glad we could do it this way. I just had to figure out how to *6 to get you all. So if any chance we can move the slide back to the map? Yeah, thank you. So under the cleanup concept and where it says green for native trees preservation, it's true that there are no green icons on this slide, and I think we should fix that. Specifically, we are very interested in preservation of native black cottonwood, Pacific madrone, and Oregon white oak, and Pacific yew as well. And if people are interested in finding out where we have those mapped out, I am more than happy to provide a vegetation map. So Dan, Aaron, we could work together on that, and I can also make sure it gets uploaded. Would that work? Okay.
Yeah, sure. And but you know, some of course, like there's some really nice madrone in the central parcel, right? And I think that's where those are largely focused. And there are a lot of trees in the west parcel, but I know some of those are non-native and perhaps of less interest to Metro.
Yes, there are some ash trees and some others that are not native as well, but mostly central parcel does have the Pacific madrone, and it is important to point out in the 2016 removal action how diligently everyone worked with a certified arborist to make sure we could work within the drip line of the trees and preserve them, and it's been almost 4 years now, and they are still surviving, but we're going to continue monitoring that.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you. And we can put that down as an action item through the notes with Kiz. So I have one more question, and it is for Dan. So who is funding the DEQ cleanup?
So I would actually, we have it's being funded, I believe, by a combination of the Port and Metro. And in terms of the specifics of how much each party is paying, we're not aware of, but they're paying our bills.
Okay.
And Dwight, did you want to say anything else about that, or Katie?
Yeah, this is Dwight Liesel, Port of Portland. I think that answers it, Dan. It's a combination of the Port and Metro funding this cleanup.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Dan and Aaron and Katie on the phone, everyone that was involved in presenting and asking questions. That wraps us up for that presentation.
Yep.
And that will take us, because we're running a bit over, I'd like us to just skip the break and move right into the next presentation. So the next presentation is for the Willamette Cove in-water cleanup, and we have Eva DiMaria with EPA, Josh Bale, who's the GSI Water Solutions on behalf of the Willamette Cove and Water Remedial Design Group, and Jessica Terlikowski with the City of Portland, who's the Community Engagement Coordinator, all co-presenting today on this topic. So Eva, I believe you're starting out, is that right? Okay, so I'll go ahead and hand it over to Eva and put us on mute. And Eva, we can't hear you yet if you're talking. Still can't hear you. Did you try pressing #6?
Can you hear me now?
Yes. We can hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay, good. So my name is Eva Di Maria, and I'm the Remedial Project Manager from EPA, overseeing the Willamette Cove in-water cleanup. So next slide. So the learning objective for this very short presentation by me is to explain the history and the general health risks surrounding the Willamette Cove, describe the purpose of the Cove in-river agreement, and as Dan so mentioned many times, I am just talking about the in-river part. And then the other part is understanding the roles of the different agencies and responsible parties. Next slide. So in terms of the history of the in-river agreement, it was signed in December of 2019. It is the first agreement, new agreement that was signed since the ROD was issued in 2017. It took a while to negotiate and actually come to an agreement. It is for 100% of remedial design. And one of the important factors in this whole cleanup is that the in-river cleanup must be integrated with the upland cleanup. And this is important in terms of ensuring that recontamination does not happen or reoccur, and to ensure that sources upland are controlled such that recontamination does not occur. Next slide. So there have been questions about who are the parties involved in this agreement. There are 4 major parties, and we've basically divided them into 2 types. The first party is the performing and the funding parties, and this is the state of Oregon, the city of Portland, and the port of Portland. And what we mean by performing and funding parties is that these 3 parties will be actually performing and implementing the remedial design, and they are also funding it. And then the other party is the settling federal agencies, which is made up of these 6 groups, the Maritime Administration, Coast Guard, GSA, etc. And they are only funding this part of the remedial design. And so this cleanup has been divided between the funding parties, 25% each. Next slide. New slide. Okay, so there have been questions about the types of health risks, specifically in the Willamette Cove in-river portion of the Portland Harbor site. In general, we've done a risk assessment for the whole Portland Harbor site, but not specifically for Willamette Cove. But we could, kind of state what type of exposures are happening in the cove, and based on that, determine the type of risk that might happen. And so, within the river itself, near Willamette Cove, the main contaminants of concern that are within the sediment management areas are PCBs and dioxins. Next slide. So when we discuss health risks, we have to consider a number of things. And I think the biggest thing to understand is that we are talking about long-term health risks. And there are a number of things to consider, which is the frequency of exposure, which is like, are you exposed daily, several times per month, once per month to these contaminants? And this is also dependent on the type of exposure that is being evaluated. What type of exposure? Are we eating contaminated fish? Are we wading or swimming in contaminated water? Are we playing on the beach? Are we, eating the sediment? Is there a baby there that's putting sediment, beach sand into his or her mouth? Are we drinking contaminated river water? So those are the types of different exposure that we have to consider. And the highest risk would be those that are actually eating contaminated fish or shellfish, and this is because of the bioaccumulation of contaminants within fish and shellfish. Next slide. And so in terms of the roles and responsibilities within this work, as Dan has mentioned, EPA is lead for the in-river cleanup, and the boundary is the top of the bank to the river, and we will basically follow where the contamination goes up to the middle of the navigation channel, following where, starting with the sediment management area and then moving out just to try and delineate the full extent of contamination, both laterally and in depth. DEQ is the lead for the upland, as Dan mentioned, and the boundary would start from the top of the bank inland. And the performing parties are the ones that will be implementing the actual remedial design. And so this includes conducting a sufficiency assessment, which means looking at source control reports, evaluations, decisions that have been conducted in the area, that also looks at the different pathways of contamination into the river, which would include groundwater, overwater, stormwater, riverbank erosion that could actually recontaminate our remedy. The other things that are also involved in remedial design would be the pre-design investigation, basically figuring out, what kind of sampling do we need, planning for that, what are the data gaps, and how to conduct that. And then from the pre-design investigation, we develop a remedial design work plan. And from there, the 30% design, 60%, 90%, and hopefully, eventually, 100% design. Next slide. And that's it. Any questions?
Thanks, Eva. I don't see any questions right now. So some might come up a little bit later. So why don't we go ahead and keep moving. So thank you so much, Eva. And let's just keep you on the line in case some questions come up for you when we get to the end of the next presentation, if that's okay.
Thank you.
All right. So, sorry, I keep putting myself on mute thinking it's okay for you. Okay, so we have Josh Bale, who's with GSI Water Solutions on behalf of the Willamette Cove and Water Remedial Design Group here, and Jessica Tarlikowski with the City of Portland, who's the Community Engagement Coordinator. So I'll hand it over to the both of you to keep going on this topic.
All right, thank you. Hi, I'm Josh Bale with GSI Water Solutions. I'm the contractor project manager lead for the performing parties for the in-water work. And we're going to talk a little bit about Willamette Cove, but because of the great job that Dan and Eva did, we can kind of condense our discussion of Willamette Cove because what happened in water is largely driven by what happened in the uplands area, and focus more on just the remedial design process, which I know some people may be very aware of the details of a remedial design process. For some people, this may be a new concept. As a lot of projects are getting ready to move into remedial design, we thought it was a good opportunity to just talk about it more as a holistic process. Next slide. So as we've already discussed, performing parties for the in-water remedial design is the City of Portland, Port of Portland, and State of Oregon's operating through the Department of State Lands. Next slide, please. So introduce the site a little bit in history has already kind of been done tonight, so we can shortcut that side of it, talk about the remedial design process I talked about, some of the initial timeline aspects to move forward on remedial design, and then Jessica Terlikowski will talk about the community involvement piece at the end. Next slide. So the Willamette Cove site on the end water, I think it's an important point to mention, and it was talked about in the upland presentation, but this is for the in-water portion of the Willamette Cove site. The in-water portion is adjacent to the upland portion of the site, but as the presentation earlier talked about, at the top of bank is a transition between what we're working on the remedial design for the in-water versus what the upland group is working on. There will be collaboration as we move forward on making sure those two designs integrate together, but this is for the in-water design. And also, probably another good point to mention is the left side of the screen of the red box that incorporates the in-water project area does go beyond the southern extents, or excuse me, the northern extents, western extents, however you want to think of it based on the map, the left end, beyond the edge of the Willamette Cove upland site and actually into a portion of the next property on the riverbank. Also, important to mention is the reason on the right side of the screen it juts inward is that purple area is the McCormick and Baxter cap, which was placed as part of the McCormick and Baxter Superfund Site remedy for an in-water cap. And next slide. So, you know, what is remedial design? How does it play a role in? We know the ROD came out 2 years ago. So what is the ROD versus the remedial design? So the way that I like to think of it is the ROD is telling you we have this piece of land here and we want to put a house on this piece of land. We need to get this house built, but the record of decision is not telling you exactly how to build it. They just are telling you we want a house right here on this portion of the property, similar to we want a cleanup action to occur, dredging or capping on a certain portion of a site. The remedial design is like the process of going through all the design, the permitting, the construction planning process that happens before you implement the remedy, whereas the remedial action is like actually getting through all that design and front-end planning process and permitting to actually start implementing the remedy to clean up the site. Next slide. So as Eva showed in her earlier slide, this is the record of decision technology assignments. The yellow along the edge of the bank is areas that are going to be strategically dredged, and the green areas are areas where they recommend a cap to be implemented on that based on the risk evaluation that has been done to date, taking that data and determining the boundaries that active cleanups need to happen. So with that, it's important to know that capping can be a variety of things. It doesn't have to look exactly like the McCormick and Baxter cap just because we're adjacent to the McCormick and Baxter cap. There's a variety of type of capping materials that can be used. Next slide. So we can kind of skip through quickly the next two slides. This is just pictures of the Cooperage plant, the barrel plant for those who, if they didn't remember that term, and the dry docks that occurred. The next slide is looking at the site over a period of time. What's important to note is the dry docks stand out over the water. There's some log rafting going on in those earlier slides. As the structures along the uplands of the facility were removed, there's still a bunch of log rafting and some minimal structures all the way to 1975, and then you move to now, and there's just a few remnant piles in the water. And otherwise, it looks like a clean site that you can't see anything at the surface. Next slide. So there's a bunch of pieces and factors that go into remedial design. This slide's just an illustration of all the things and factors and considerations that have to go into doing the remedial design. Next slide. We'll kind of talk through some of these factors. So data collection is one of the important factors that go into remedial design. The record decision was based on data that was collected over a period of years and a risk assessment that was performed to evaluate which contaminants are of concern at the site. And then you have to go back when you go into the remedial design phase, and you have to do more focused sampling to bound those extensive contamination and those capping and dredging areas that were called out for in the record of decision. This may happen over multiple phases. You'll go in with the intent of collecting all the data you need to move forward completely through design. But when you collect that data, you might find some additional gaps that come up, and you may have to go back and do some additional sampling. It's also probably important to mention that the pre-design investigation is a process at every single site that has signed up to do cleanup under remedial design has to go through this design investigation process. This is separate from the pre-RD group investigation that occurred in 2018. Next slide. And then monitoring. So after you implement a remedy, and while you're implementing the remedy, you have to do monitoring in the project area. You have to develop a plan for that long-term monitoring after remedies put into place. That long-term monitoring plan, while it happens after the end of the remedy, you still have to plan it while you're doing remedial design and make sure you have that plan in place and that the agencies and their partners are all in agreement that long-term plan is going to be effective to ensure the remedy will be monitored and maintained. And then with that, if anything happens that requires repairs or maintenance, that you need to also have a plan developed during remedial design that tells you how to repair the remedy that was put into place, whether it's a cap or if you have dredge areas that you need to do repairs on because sloughing slopes or something like that. Next slide. The process review. Every project has to go through a process review, and just like building a home, you have to go through a number of factors. You have to develop a legal agreement. You have to come up with objectives for what you're looking for the remedial design to meet. You have to go through a permitting process where there's specific agencies and specific concerns by these agencies that are looking at aspects that are unique to what they care about, whether it be flood rise analysis, whether it be protection of biota, fish or other species, whether it be restoration of the bank and what type of plantings occur. All these things are part of the permitting process. And then also EPA and all their partners have to review all over the design documents and all the support design materials that have to be developed, and they have to approve of these before we can move forward on design. Next slide. And then institutional controls. So in addition to the active remedy where you're going out and placing caps or dredging materials, you also put in place administrative and legal tools to help ensure that the remedy that you spent the time and money to put in place actually is protective over the long run. There's a variety of institutional controls out there, things like fish advisories, specifically for Willamette Cove, because as you can see from the earlier slide where there's a large amount of capping that occurs in this area, we don't want to allow for navigation to occur in those areas or anchoring of large vessels to occur in those areas. There may be land use restrictions for future development on the riverbanks or over the water to prevent damage to those remedies that have been put in place. And all these have to be thought through and come up with and approved by EPA and their partners during the remedial design process. In addition, as we've talked about before and as continue to be talked about, is the institutional control program has to be done at a harbor-wide scale to make sure the remedy is not just effective locally, but it's effective on a harbor-wide scale. Next slide. So engineering analysis. This is obviously the heart and meat of the detailed side of the process. We don't need to go through specifically each one of the design steps in here. It's important to understand that you go through initial engineering considerations and think about the details of the design aspects that have to be thought through, whether it be seismic, whether it be flood rise analysis, whether it be factors like we talked about with the institutional controls to protect the remedy, what type of wave action could affect the remedy. All these things have to be thought about. And then we also want, a very important part of this is state, public, and tribal participation. On top of the basic engineering concerns, the engineering design, and good engineering design, always has to take into account the various stakeholders' concerns and the partners' concerns and making sure those are factored into the way the design occurs. And once again, the permitting process is another avenue to ensure that departments and public's concerns are considered in the design. Next slide. And scheduling. So scheduling occurs in a number of ways. The initial sign-up agreement that was done in December states a bunch of dates that certain documents have to be delivered by. But in addition, there's a lot of dates that weren't put in there that the pre-design investigation work plan and the remedial design work plan helps set those dates. So you create a baseline schedule, you have a vision for how long it's going to take to get the design done, and then as you move through it, you can't just ignore that baseline schedule. You got to make sure you're constantly looking at it, make sure you're not falling behind schedule, make sure if the schedule has to change because of a reason that you're updating your schedule to reflect that. Next slide. So just to real quickly talk about the three kind of important dates in 2020 that are going to happen in 2019. So the agreement was signed December 13th of 2019, and April 10th, which is coming up less than a month from now, the draft sufficiency assessment, which is a document that evaluates pathways that could recontaminate the site if you implemented the design. And the pre-design investigation work plan documents are due. Those draft documents will be reviewed by EPA and their partners, and then they will provide comments back to the performing parties. We'll integrate and evaluate the comments, and then we'll produce a final document, and then we can move into the pre-design field investigation. And that's anticipated to happen in the fall of this year. Next slide. Logistics. In addition to the engineering concerns, the administrative and legal concerns, you got to think about logistical aspects. When you go to implement this remedy, can you do it all at once, or do you have to think about windows when you implement this remedy? When there's migrating fish passing through the area, you may not be able to implement portions of the remedy. The permitting process is not a process that happens over a few weeks or a month. You have to plan ahead for that permitting process. And most importantly, impacts to the community. We have to take that into factor when we plan this design, plan the timing of the design, that the community impacts and the community factors are taken into the logistical aspects of this design. Next slide. And this is where I'll turn it over to Jessica.
Great, thank you, Josh. Good evening, everyone. I'm Jessica Terlikowski, and I do community engagement work for the City of Portland, but I'm also the community engagement coordinator specifically for the Willamette Cove in-water site as well. So I'm excited to talk with you all this evening about the different ways that we're looking to have community be involved as we're moving forward with the in-water work. I think it's really important to note just how committed the city, the state, and the port are to meaningful involvement of community in this process. We recognize that there's great public interest in this site, and as a result of that, we're really working to have a strong community involvement component to this area. So when we're talking about what that means, what we're really looking at is, making sure that information that we're providing regarding the project area is accessible, it's understandable, that we're providing regular updates and staying in regular communication with community members. And then also the other piece that I'm very excited about, and I think is a little bit different about this particular site, is that we're also creating space and structure to support all of those other efforts. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But before I do, I want to just kind of note too, as we're starting off in, and stating how much we want to make sure that people understand what we're talking about. This is a very technical project, as everybody knows. There's a lot of jargon that gets used. There's a lot of complicated language and concepts. And we're really wanting to make sure that information, those technical terms, are broken down and made accessible. So we're really looking for ongoing feedback and conversation with community to hear what's working on our side and what's not in terms of how we present information. So as we're kind of going through this, and at the end, you'll see my contact information. I would love to know more, because ultimately our goal is to be able to convey what's happening to you all in a way that is easily understood. Next slide. So one of the things that we're doing is we actually have a city-administered grant program where we are dedicating resources to community members to help build out and think through
what would an advisory body look like to help inform and to stay informed about what's going on regarding design at Willamette Cove. What I think is sort of unique about this is that we haven't built anything yet. There's no structure, there's no process that's been established yet in terms of how we'll be engaging with community. We're really looking to community to collaborate and to do that together. And the city and the state and the port are also putting resources into that effort to help us build out that structure. And then we also have resources that are being made available to community groups so that they have resources to lend their expertise, leverage their networks, and to really help us think through how community can be involved in this process. But the other piece is about building community capacity around some of these remedy design topics. So that's why I'm really excited that we have Josh, that he's here to help us understand some of these complicated and technical issues, and we're looking to hear more from you all about how we can do that. Next slide. So we have made funds available to each of these organizations that are listed on this slide. Also, some of you may recognize these lovely people that are pictured in these pictures for the presentation. They are from a workshop that we did with the grantees last month, where we kind of got everyone on board, had created an opportunity for people to meet one another, and to really think through what are the ways in which community organizations who have deep connections within their respective communities can think through how they can engage their constituents in our efforts moving forward. One of those efforts is around the information management plan, which we had talked with you all about last quarter. And then the other piece is really around Willamette Cove, and thinking about how we can work with community to develop a structure, to develop a process, to identify goals and objectives where we can ensure that we're sharing information in a way that is accessible, that's easily understood, and having some ongoing conversation. I want to say that I'm very excited to hear that EPA's Community Involvement Plan outlines in more detail about some of the ways in which performing parties can engage communities in remedy design. So Laura, I'm eagerly waiting to be able to dive into that tomorrow to learn a bit more about that and to see how we can then involve that in our work moving forward. One thing I do want to note is, so while we have these organizations that have deep roots within the community who are helping us with our work, it's important to note that other organizations and community members will have an opportunity to play a role within this advisory group for Willamette Cove. We're really looking at the funds that we've made available to community organizations is to help us think through what the process and structure will be, and in fact are going to be bringing on a facilitator to help us with that effort, and working with the community to flesh that out in conjunction with the state and the port and the city. Next slide. Okay, so that is my contact information, and definitely invite you all to reach out. And if you all have questions, to look forward to hearing some of those now or following up at a later date.
Great, thank you so much. Okay, so I think we have a couple questions online that I saw pop up, so I'll go ahead and bring those up right now, and I'll state them for you. There's one that says, where can I find info on remediation planned approved for other areas in the Willamette? So that's probably more of an EPA question. So who would we want to pass that one to?
Yeah, this is Hunter with EPA. I can just say on our website is where we have our most up-to-date information on all of the in-water work going on. So that is a great area you can go, and it talks, there will be information there on all of our new agreements.
Great, thank you. And then I just got a comment from someone that said, everybody's been really great tonight and really appreciate all the presentations. We know how hard this is for y'all to be in here and do this all night, so that they just wanted to give everybody props who presented today and say great job. So yay for you guys. Yes, very nice. And I don't see other questions, so I want to give us just another minute. If you do have questions for anybody, Eva, Jessica, Josh, I think it would be okay right now to ask those. Okay, so there's this one. Is that one probably for EPA? Somebody's telling you to go have a glass of beer. We will do that happily. That other one. And so this one, I don't think it's for review, but I'll say, here's the question, can the capped area be used for anchorage or built on? Does the river become useless?
So this is Hunter with EPA. I can jump in on that because this is kind of a site-wide question too. These are all thoughts that are going to be things that we think about during remedial design. So theoretically, we could design a cap that you could anchor on, but that would require robust engineering. So it's all very site-specific. If there is an area where we typically have ships come up to berth, then that area we probably either don't want to cap, we just want to dredge all the contamination out, or we want to have a really robust cap in that area. So ideally, river concerns are going to be part of the thinking process of remedial design.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's probably also important to mention there may be other reasons why if you're trying to create fish habitat, you may not want anchoring in that area because you put a fish mix type of material there that you want to make sure stays in place for fish spawning habitat.
Okay, thanks for adding that. Okay, so if that's all the questions, I have a few wrap-up pieces. So I know we got a comment about public comment, so I just wanted to say that I wanted to mention this on the phone that even though we're recording tonight, we're recording the presentations and we'll be posting them, but we're not recording any formal public comments this evening for any of the topics that were presented. So I just wanted to make that really clear. These are presentations to provide you with overviews and updates in regards to public comment periods, but not an actual public comment process. It's happening right now. So just wanted to let everyone know that. And then if you have any feedback about the meeting tonight or any questions that you didn't get answered about the meeting in general or future meetings, please go ahead and email those to my colleague, Kiz Prusha, and his email address is up on the side somewhere. I know Jean had that up there. But it's kprusha@triangleassociates.com. And, of course, you're always welcome to email Laura, but she is going to be out of the office for a few weeks, so we would prefer if you could contact us if possible. That way you'll get a more quick response. So then, Laura Knudsen, I know you had one other thing you wanted to touch on in regards to highlighting the documents that folks can download on the side. Did you want to touch base on that now?
Sure, Annie, thanks, and I just want to thank everyone for being online tonight and on the phone and all of our presenters. Everyone just did such a great job pulling this together, and really thanking Jean, too, as our moderator and Annie as our facilitator. Just thank you to everyone. So as a final treat, an extra treat for all of you who are still on at this late hour, I just wanted to point your attention to the pod in the center, which has a bunch of files. And I'll go over those files in a second. I'll go over them. Well, actually, Jean, why don't you go ahead and go over how to download, if you don't mind, briefly. And then I'll explain the files quickly.
All right, I'd be happy to. So I'll draw everyone's attention to a window that you should see in the upper right of your screen. It's called Public Forum or PF Download Related Files below. There'll be a long list of files in that window. You can click on one file or actually hold down the Control key on your keyboard and select multiple files. And as soon as you select one or more files, the Download Files button at the bottom of that window will become active. So click one or more files to select them, and press the Download Files button, and a new browser window will open up with a link where you can download the selected file or files that you clicked on the previous menu. So you'll be able to pull down multiple files that were highlighted in today's meeting. On the left of that window, we do also have a collection of the websites that were highlighted and brought up, so those active hyperlinks are also available for you to click on or copy and paste and save for your own records.
I just want to highlight in the files, there's a few files that weren't discussed. I think someone else, one of the questions earlier was about what about the rest of the river, and that we had a focus on Willamette Cove tonight, and that's actually partially because, well, largely in part because community leaders helped shape this agenda and put input, and Willamette Cove came, you know, to the top as well, so that's another reason why we focused on Willamette Cove tonight. But there are some other areas where we already have fact sheets. We'll be posting these online, but whoever is still with us, we have about 48 people in the room still, you can download them now. So there is a fact sheet. Well, we do have some of the presentations available, so you can download those. You will see the third file down is River Mile 9 West, which the FMC Corporation put together, which is one of the areas that we signed an agreement with. There's also a fact sheet for River Mile 10 West. General Electric put that together, and it's a joint EPA PRP fact sheet. There is a Willamette Cove in-water fact sheet as well. Their presentation is also available. There's an updated River Mile 11 East fact sheet. That is a good one to review because they're steaming along. And then there's a Terminal 4 fact sheet as well. It's another good one to review because the work has been going on a while there. And you can see my CIP slides as well. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Laura and Jean, and thank you to everyone that helped prepare for this meeting tonight. I know this was a big lift. Thank you to everybody that attended and took time out of your evenings and away from all of your important parts of your life to be participating in this. If you have any follow-up questions or comments, please feel free to email us, and I think that's it for the night, so we will go ahead and wrap up. Happy Wednesday to everybody, and we will see you again in June. Thank you all.
Thanks. Wash your hands.
Thank you, Laura. Fantastic job.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. Good night.
Good night.